Hello everyone, this is Professor Reimer. This video is from our World History class on Monday, May 24th and Tuesday, May 25th. It's entitled Unit 10, DOL 2, The Cold War Escalates. Our objective in this lesson is to explain the impact of major events associated with the Cold War by creating an annotated map. As always, let's begin with a preview. So, Government of China in 1944, here it goes. In an effort to prevent civil war, the two predominant parties of China, the nationalists and the communists, carried on peace negotiations while China operated with two forms of government. Chiang Kai-shek was the leader of the nationalist government and Mao Zedong was the leader of the communist government. The nationalists were based in southern and central China. The communists were based in northern China. What do you predict happened to resolve the problem of the two governments and why? Pause the video, make the prediction, come back, and we'll continue. All right. Did some of you predict that would resolve the problem? Or did some of you predict not? As in, there ended up being a civil war. Stay tuned in this lesson to find out. But before we get to that, a little bit of a preview. This is our second lesson about the Cold War. So remember, from 1945 to 1991, I should say, there's a note-taking guide to go along with this. Print it, use it. It'll help you. So the USA, right there, stars and stripes, and the USSR, hammer and sickle. That's the symbol for the USSR. A variety of strategies to win the Cold War. Remember, the Cold War is this ideological struggle between these two countries for world domination. And last time we talked about the early years of the Cold War and events in Germany, in Eastern Europe, and Greece, Turkey. So the U.S. used a containment policy. You got to know that term, to stop the spread of communism, contain the spread of communism. How did they do that? Well, it sent aid, both military and economic aid, to places that were resisting communism, such as Turkey. That's known as the Truman Doctrine. It also sent money under the Marshall Plan to Western Europe to prevent poor economic conditions that might have been fertile soil for the rooting of communism. And it formed a defensive alliance with Western European countries as a way to protect those countries. And it defeated the Soviet blockade of Berlin by flying in supplies in what's known as the Berlin Airlift. We talked about all that last time. Now, to the fall of China to communism. It had a major impact on the Cold War between the USA and the USSR. Look, in 1950, this is a map of the US perspective of these two worlds. In blue, the NATO countries, and in red, the Warsaw Pact countries led by the USSR. And you see here, it's spreading, communism spreading into China. Let's take a look how that happened. So in the 1920s, go back, even before World War II, nationalist leader, you see there, Chiang Kai-shek, took over and ran China as a dictatorship. Meanwhile, communism was growing under the leadership of Mao Zedong. You see him there on the left. And during this time, let's see, I'll put myself there. The Communist Party was gaining popularity among poor peasants. Why? The Communist Party offered to redistribute land from wealthy warlords. In fact, as it says under the left, Mao saw the revolutionary potential of China's peasants. He broke with more traditional Marxist teachings, and especially as interpreted by Lenin, who focused on the industrial workers as the vanguard of the revolution. Mao focused on the peasants. All right, so from 1930 to 1949, these two sides are fighting in a bloody civil war, right? Mostly the nationalists are in the south, while the communists are in the north. The nationalists are supported by the United States, and the communists supported by the Soviet Union, right? Over time, communist public support and military organization proved superior to the nationalists. Now, when World War II began, when the Japanese invaded China in 1937, they agreed to a truce, right? They would both fight the Japanese. But all along, the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek really had the goal of defeating the communists. So it's really the communists that are seen as the side that defeated the invading Japanese, right? And this helps explain how they began to win control of China, the communists. And in 1949, communists won the Civil War, and Mao created the People's Republic of China. And you see him there alongside Vladimir Lenin and Karl Marx as the three revolutionary communists. So what happened to Chiang Kai-shek? His government fled China, you see here, to the tiny island of Taiwan. And the U.S. were completely shocked. They did not think that Mao Zedong's forces would win. And for a long, long time, the United States only recognized the nationalists as the government in China. China, to this day, still considers Taiwan to be property of China. The Taiwanese don't see it that way. All right. In 1958, Mao began a massive program to create agriculture and industry called the Great Leap Forward. It's similar, modeled on the 5-year plans of Stalin in the 1930s, right? The goal was to catch up to the industrialized West. So millions of Chinese were sent to work on large collective farms to grow food, right? You see here propaganda showing that. And others were sent to work on industrial projects like making iron and steel or building dams and railroads. Oops, wrong button. Here we go. So, again, the goal, struggle hard for 3 years, change the face of China, catch up with Britain and America. And you see here Chinese poster at the time emphasizing this. Now, the U.S. response to the fall of China was to more aggressively confront communism around the world. They saw communism as a threat, spreading now not just in Western Europe, but also in East Asia. And it must be stopped because of this theory of the domino theory, that if neighboring countries become communist, then it will lead to a cascade of other countries that also would become communist too. So the U.S. vowed to contain the spread of communism anywhere in the world, anywhere. And it first took this or acted on this vow when communism threatened Korea. All right, so to the what's known as the Korean War. So during World War II, Korea was liberated from Japanese control by the U.S. Army in the south and the Soviet Army in the north, very similar to what happened in Germany, though Germany was divided between east and west. Korea is divided between north and south along this 38-degree parallel. Communist government in North Korea and a democracy in South Korea. In 1950, North Korea, using Soviet-supplied weapons with the aid of the Soviet Union, crossed the 38th parallel and attacked South Korea with the goal of unifying Korea all under communist rule. The South Koreans appealed to the United Nations, and the U.S., under authority of the United Nations, sent troops to Korea to contain communism. Right? They land here at Busan, and they move northward to drive the North Koreans out of South Korea. However, they didn't just stop at the 38th parallel. They pushed all the way into the north, got too close to China, and as a result, the Chinese army entered the war and came to the aid of the North Koreans. Fighting continued for another year or so, and finally a ceasefire is agreed to in 1953. Ceasefire just means fighting stops, but no peace is declared. The war is not over, and the 38th parallel is restored as the boundary. So the U.S. stopped the spread of communism into into South Korea from North Korea, that it was willing to fight to contain communism, but today Korea remains divided between a communist North and a democratic South. The war has yet to be resolved. Though Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, I believe, met with the president of the United States today to continue work on bringing it into the conflict. I haven't heard how that went. All right, let's pause there. Pause the video. Check over your notes. Answer this question. Which government allied with North Korea in its attempt to take over South Korea? All right, did you put C? Read the question carefully. Allied with North Korea. Just think of the map, right? The North is closer to the Soviet Union, right? So the alliance between North Korea is with the Soviet Union. C is the answer. The United States allied with South Korea. All right, so to maybe the wider world, let's zoom out here. The fighting in Korea convinced many nations to not choose a side. They saw it's safer to stay neutral, otherwise known as non-aligned, mostly in Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. But the Cold War would continue to escalate in the 50s and 60s as communism threatened those places. We'll turn more to those events next lesson. Let's talk now about the nuclear arms race, space race, and a little bit of espionage. Though I could talk a lot about espionage, having just rewatched FX The Americans. If you're looking for a great show and you have Amazon Prime, check out The Americans. It's all about espionage in the Cold War of the 1980s. All right, so to the nuclear arms race. In 1949, the U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons ended when the USSR successfully tested an atomic bomb. You see a picture of it there, and the test. Now, this set off a nuclear arms race, right? Who's going to get to the finish line first? Except the finish line was not like winning the race, but a never-ending cycle of who has more bombs than the other person. Especially once a new, more powerful bomb known as a hydrogen bomb was tested by the United States in 1952, 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. So the Soviets had to have it. In 1953, they detonated their own. Helped on, I learned today, by the great physicist Andrei Sakharov, whose birthday we celebrate today, 100-year birthday. It's being celebrated in Russia right now. So the race continues, right? All right, now who's going to have more bombs, but who's going to be able to send them against the other country, right? Both of these countries developed rockets called ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that could deliver these warheads to distant targets, as in far, far away, right? One example of a launcher there. Also, they could be launched on submarines. There's a U.S. Polaris submarine. And in the 1950s, President Eisenhower, whom you see there, escalated the Cold War in what's called Brinkmanship, right? Going right to the brink or the edge. Like, we will go to the edge to use our nuclear weapons. Don't test us. And you see, I mean, both sides with their nuclear sites, weapons pointed at each other. Yes, it was a dangerous time for the world. Because remember, under the NATO or in the NATO alliance, that if the USSR attacked any NATO member, the US would retaliate against the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, wanting to protect itself against such an attack, began stockpiling its weapons, right? I mean, just look at the sheer numbers of the amount of weapons in 1986, 1987, towards the end, pretty much the end of the Cold War, right before some peace treaties are signed, some disarmament treaties. I mean, just the sheer numbers of 50,000, 60,000 nuclear warheads is staggering. It's staggering how many nukes were pointed at each other, right? And this idea that we could destroy you is known as mutually assured destruction. Don't launch at us, we could destroy you. Well, don't launch at us, we could destroy you. And really what they meant by that is like the world could be destroyed. All right, now let's turn to what's known as the space race, right? Because again, the fronts of this Cold War are in multiple places, even in space. In 1957, the USSR used its first ICBM to launch Sputnik, first satellite into space, right? this machine, I guess, that orbits the Earth, sending down signals, right? The Americans feared that the U.S. had fallen far behind. Who knows what's on Sputnik? What are they what can they do up there? And as a result, the Cold War escalates into a space race to show American and Soviet dominance, right? Anywhere a side could get an edge, they would try, even in space. Right. So in 1958, the USA created NASA, or the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to catch up. U.S. schools began to promote math, science, and technology, right? And the Americans began to launch their own satellites and eventually people into space. But the USSR beats the U.S. by getting or sending the first man into orbit and orbiting the moon. His name is Yuri Gagarin. In 1961, Alan Shepard is not far behind him as the first American. And in 1962, President John Kennedy commits the U.S. to beating the Soviet Union in the race to the moon, which in 1969 is a success. In the Apollo 11 moon landing, you see Neil Armstrong there. All right. Also, right, these two sides are fighting each other through intelligence agencies, the CIA in the United States and the KGB in the Soviet Union. Now, these are foreign intelligence agencies. The CIA operated in foreign countries gathering intelligence for the United States. The KGB operated in foreign countries gathering intelligence for the Soviet Union. And they mostly did that through spies, human intelligence, such as Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, but increasingly also using spy planes overhead, taking pictures, gathering information that way. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. Next time, we'll turn to more of these threats of communism spreading into the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, especially the Cuban Missile Crisis, the war in Vietnam. But just know that, remember, containment, containment, containment. Anywhere communism was a threat to spread, the U.S., through the CIA often, would intervene. All right. Here's our processing activity. Create an annotated map of the following events with the Cold War, associated with the Cold War. Each entry on the map must include the name of the event, and I've given you 4 down below. Indicate the location of the event, and that just could be, right, draw a line from your text box to the place. And then give a summary. That's the most important. I want to see a summary of its impact. 1 to 3 sentences of its impact, its effect. We're working on a skill here. And finally, label the 2 superpowers involved in the Cold War. I want you to show me on the map the 2 superpowers. So, end of the Civil War in China in 1949. Remember, you're summarizing the impact. Don't tell me so much about the event, about its effect. The Korean War, development of the hydrogen bomb, and the launch of Sputnik. Its impact. How did it affect or impact world events, especially the Cold War? All right. Work hard. I'll see you in the Google Meet. Ask me questions if you need to. I'll see you next time.